It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Mary F. Calvert. She's a photojournalist based in Annapolis, Maryland. And Jeremy Todd. He's a U.S. Army veteran, combat journalist, also based in Annapolis, Maryland. And I thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here.
This is part one of a two-part show, and for those that have been victims of sexual assault, these shows deal with many sensitive topics.
More than 100,000 men have been sexually assaulted in the military in recent decades. Shame and stigma kept the vast majority from coming forward to report the attacks. This, according to a story in the September 10th, 2019 edition of the New York Times. The story was the work of Mary Calvert, who's been working on the story for many years. According to Mary's biography on her website, maryfcalvert.com, Mary Calvert is committed to using photography to effect meaningful social change and is known for producing work on gender-based human rights issues. Calvert believes that journalists have a duty to shine a light into the deepest recesses of the human experience and provide a mirror for society to examine itself. She has won the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award twice and is a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist in feature photography. For her work on sexual assault in the military, she's received numerous honors. In addition to being a guest faculty member of the Eddie Adams Workshop in good old Jeffersonville, New York, the Western Kentucky University Mountain Workshops and Momenta Workshops, she has been a member of the faculty for the Department of Defense Worldwide Military Photographers Workshop in Fort Meade, right up the road, for the last 19 years. In Mary's story in the New York Times, 6 men spoke about their experience, but you've been working on this for a long time, Mary. You've photographed more than 6 men, yes?
Yes, many more than 6 men. And I started this project 6 years ago when I was looking for a project in the United States, something that I could drive to, because I no longer had the funds of a newspaper behind me to tell these kinds of stories. And my husband mentioned that military sexual trauma was a horrible problem and nobody was doing anything about it. And the year I started, the DoD put out their numbers, and there was an estimated 26,000 sexual assaults in the U.S. military, and that just blew me away. I mean, I was really shocked because I'd been doing this workshop with the DoD for many years at that point, and I used to walk down the halls of some of these bases that we would do the workshop in, and I would see these signs on the wall that said, if you've been sexually assaulted, call this number. Here's a hotline. Here's some kind of assistance. And I really looked at those and I thought to myself, why do they need that? Surely that's not a problem here. And then when I read the numbers, I was so shocked, and that really angered me a lot.
And that's men?
That was, that at the time was the total number of people, men and women, being sexually assaulted in the military. But back then, even 6 years ago, they didn't talk about the men very much. I had started with the women, and I worked with the women for a couple of years, and then I looked at what happens when they lose everything and they become homeless, and the high numbers of women who had military sexual trauma in their background and were now homeless. And then when the first 2 parts of the project started getting published and people would leave comments online, I started to hear from men. And I had men writing me saying, we constitute the majority of the cases. When are you going to do something on us? And so that part of the story found me. So that was, I guess, 2.5 years ago. So I started working with men.
The Time story was just the men, and it's 6 stories of men coming forward, and it's not easy for anyone that has been sexually assaulted to come forward. I mean, this had to have been heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking, and when you're sitting in front of somebody and they're telling you, when they're trusting you enough to tell you the most horrible, traumatic, devastating thing that ever happened to them, that's it's so intense, and sometimes it's hard to put into words, because I respect them and their stories, and I never take it for granted that they're telling me this, and I'm always very upfront about this is for publication. I'm going to be taking pictures. I'm going to be taking difficult pictures because I have to show what this trauma has done to their lives.
You had a photo in the Time story about these 6 men, one that broke down in a grocery store. The first one that was featured, Air Force veteran that was not just assaulted once, but multiple times while he was in boot camp. That was Air Force Drill Sergeant Jack Williams. He was age 71 when you photographed him.
Yes.
His story was that it was 2 a.m. in the sergeant's office, Mr. Williams recalled. The sergeant had just choked Mr. Williams, who was 18, until he passed out, he said, and then raped him at a desk while dozens of other recruits slept in the next room. The sergeant raped him twice more during basic training, he said. Each time, Mr. Williams stayed quiet, determined to make it through boot camp. He made it through, then reported the sergeant after graduation. The anger still trembles in his voice decades later when he describes the Air Force's response. What was the response of many of these?
Well, he never heard from the investigators. There was virtually no investigation ever opened. It was just swept under the rug. And this is back in the days when there was no don't ask, don't tell. There was, which was not a shining success anyway. But back in those days, if you were sexually assaulted by somebody, sometimes the perpetrator would threaten you and say, well, I'm going to tell them you're a homosexual and you'll get kicked out. Because back in those days, it was considered a national security threat. It's unbelievable to think that could happen. And, but the stigma was so strong and that it frightened people.
So they didn't tell their stories?
They did not tell their story. They were afraid. They were shamed and threatened into submission.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Mary F. Calvert. She's a photojournalist based in Annapolis, Maryland. She's been published globally. Her photographs are incredibly moving, including in the story that we're talking about, which was published in the New York Times in September, about male sexual assault in the military. Also, Jeremy Todd, a U.S. Army veteran. He was a combat journalist. He's currently working in the public affairs field. These stories that you've delved into of sexual assaults in the military, both male and female, how do you sleep? Do you have trouble sleeping?
I do. I have waves of trouble sleeping. I've had nightmares. I've had a lot of nightmares. And, of course, we've talked about panic attacks. And there are times where I'm sitting at my desk reading, doing research. Or other times when I'm talking about it, I can feel everything kind of start to get really tight in my chest. And people say, well, how do you handle that? How do you get through it? It's like, I try to suck it up because I know I'm hearing stuff. It didn't happen to me that way. And so
we are all in this room journalists, and we have all been affected by, definitely 2 of us. PTSD doesn't necessarily just have to happen because of your experience. It can happen.
Exactly.
Jeremy? Yeah.
To me, it's different triggers. So whether I read something, see something, or say something, that's what brings back these memories of, not shame, but scared.
And one of the other people that you interviewed, Ethan Hansen, it says, has avoided taking showers since he left the Marine Corps in 2014. Instead, he runs 1.5 inches of warm water in a bathtub, then rinses quickly with a plastic cup, with each splash evoking a painful moan because he was sexually assaulted in a shower. Mary, the photograph of Ethan that you shot was of him in the bathtub.
Yeah.
People really do. People let you into their most horrifying and intimate lives, yeah?
Yeah, I had gone to see him out in Minnesota, and when I first met him, he had told me about the situation with the shower and the bath and how he just doesn't take showers anymore. And I remember spending time with him and leaving thinking, oh my goodness, I should have gotten a picture of him in the bathtub. And 2 years later, I called him up and I said, hey, I want to ask you something. And I said, I know that you get terribly triggered even bathing. And the next time, could I come out there and when you take your daily bath, could I be there and make pictures? because I have to show what this is like. Because people don't really, if they just read a story, you know, stories can be very impactful, very meaningful, but until you see a picture,
It says 1,000 words. And not only that, I do think, as someone that has been a photographer, that has been a broadcast journalist, and someone that has done the written word as just a journalist, a photograph, I think all of us in this room will agree, speaks more than anything else. Yeah?
Oh,
yeah,
definitely.
I would say, I absolutely.
So when you said this to him, did he have any...
He said, let me talk to my wife. And he talked to his wife, and he called me back, and he said, it's fine.
It's amazing.
So I went out there, and it was very intense. It was very, very intense. I said, you know, I just do what you do. Don't do anything for me, because I would never set something like that up. It's just let me be there when it happens. And he dressed with the door shut, and then he let me in, and it took about 90 seconds, and it was horrible. You know.
Did you cry?
I probably cried later, but I try to keep it together while I'm working, because I don't want to upset them.
Yep.
By my reaction.
The close-up of Mr. Williams with the tears coming out of his eyes.
It makes me feel very sad. Just to see 45 years after he was brutally sexually assaulted and horribly injured during the assault, too, that he would tell me all about it. And you could see 45 years of pain on his face. And it was still right there in front of him, like it had just happened.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me is award-winning photojournalist Mary F. Calvert. She's based right here in Annapolis, Maryland. And Jeremy Todd, he's actually a friend. He's a U.S. Army veteran. He was a combat journalist. He works in the public affairs field. He's been working in public affairs since getting out of the Army, from the U.S. Army to the arts world and back, again to the civilian side of Army public relations. His work experience includes community relations, public affairs, crisis management, and strategic communications. And today he's going to be communicating about something pretty difficult. It wasn't until I tweeted out Mary's story in the New York Times about sexual assaults to men in the military did Jeremy tell me that he was a victim of sexual assault in the military. This is a tough story. It's Jeremy, I can't thank you enough for sharing it.
Well, when you pitched me the story, I almost didn't remember telling you what happened, because it's I had to tell my girlfriend Lauren and pretty much ask her permission, and then my roommate Dan, I'm like, hey, I'm going to tell my side of this. And I had totally forgotten that I'd even told Lauren about it. She said, yes, you told me about it. We talked about this well over a year ago. So to me, I was like, wow. I mean, talking about it, it's not shameful for me, but it brings up a lot of anger, the way that the leadership handled me. Instead of going after what the problem was, they went after the victim, which scares the heck out of me, because what made me want to open up was that there was a Navy story a few years back where they were going after the victims, and to me it struck right into what happened to me. I literally was blacklisted from interacting with students. I was put in a closet where I had no interaction with anyone. They wanted to protect the person that I accused, and he was still teaching students, and he was still doing his job.
Let's back up. What years were you in the military?
I joined the Army in 2004, went to Afghanistan in 2006 to 2007, came back for a little bit, and went to Iraq from 2007 to 2009. And after I got out of Iraq, they asked me where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to the schoolhouse, teach what I do, like kind of Top Gun style.
At Fort Meade?
At Fort Meade.
DINFOS?
Correct.
Okay. And
Correct.
This is where this happened?
Correct.
So you had escaped in Afghanistan. You saw combat,
Correct.
and you survived that. You probably saw people that didn't survive that. Yes.
Correct.
You came back here and you were assaulted.
It was over a long period of time. It seemed like he may have been jealous of the fact that I was fast-tracked. I made it to E6 in 4 years, and, my path of success was definitely targeted to doing awesome things. But they put him in charge of me, and it was to me, it was just banter that would have been fine if we were in combat. You smack somebody on the butt, say good game, and joke about it. But to me, I was in a professional office setting, and it just kept making me more and more angry. And I think that's the power that he had, was getting these emotions out of me that literally sank my career.
To go back to this time story, some 61,000 veterans are now formally recognized by the Department of Veterans Affairs as having been sexually traumatized during their service, and the number of claims filed each year has surged by 70% since 2010. You are one of those that is recognized by the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Correct. I went full scale, went to the Sharp, submitted the claim, and I think it's unrestricted, where they're there. Like, CID came in, they interviewed me for about 4 to 6 hours.
Criminal investigative.
Correct, Army CID. So there was probably 5 different people interviewing me, kept making me tell the same story over and over. I'm not sure if they were just trying to get better details or if they was trying to find inconsistencies, but they believed me, and then action came.
If something happened to you, you are not alone. The following list includes some of the common experiences shared by men that have survived sexual assault: anxiety, depression, fearfulness, avoiding people or places that are related to the assault or abuse, concerns or questions about sexual orientation, fear of the worst happening and having a sense of a shortened future, feeling like less of a man, or that you no longer have control over your own body, feeling on edge, being unable to relax and having difficulty sleeping, sense of blame or shame over not being able to stop the assault or abuse, especially if you experienced an erection or ejaculation, withdrawal from relationships or friendships, and an increased sense of isolation, anger issues, lashing out, substance abuse issues. Please report assaults. If you are or were in the military and have been sexually assaulted, you can get help by calling the Department of Defense Safe Helpline at 877-995-5247 or visit the DoD's safehelpline.org. Safe Helpline services are confidential, anonymous, and available worldwide 24/7. The Department of Veterans Affairs Crisis Line is available 24/7 by calling 800-273-8255 and press 1. You can also text 838-255 or visit veteranscrisisline.net. For those outside of the military, the National Sexual Abuse Hotline is 1-800-656-HOPE. Again, 1-800-656-4673. The website is rainn.org. That's rainn.org. Stands for Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Tune in next week for the rest of the 1430 Connection with Jeremy and Mary. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We'll see you next week.